So, this week's workshop is on speaking up and the courage to set boundaries. And we're going to talk a little bit about why setting boundaries is so important to building confidence, because you might be thinking, I don't know why setting boundaries has anything to do with confidence, but it actually does. And we'll get to that towards the end. We'll talk a little bit about it as we go, but that's definitely going to be where we close. And then just the importance that we have of our day-to-day life and making sure that those boundaries are set and finding our voice in speaking up. Before that's my welcome. Before I go on, I just wanted to, because there's some new faces here, introduce myself. I'm Heather Namelka, and I started Elavare to help mothers return to the workforce and build confidence. And it originally started because I got divorced and about 10 years ago, and getting back in the workforce was super, super hard. But what I discovered in the process is that building the confidence to get back into the workforce was also really hard. And I had to get back in the workforce right away. I had no choice. And some women have the flexibility to have, do it for fulfillment or do it on their own terms, or they, work part-time before they do full-time. And I had none of that. And so I had to just jump in, and it was scary and it was hard. And we worked with a team of BYU students a year ago, and they did research with women who had returned to the workforce or women that were thinking about going into the workforce. And I think 83 or 85% of them all lacked confidence. So when I got that research back, I thought, okay, well, it sounds like women regardless lack confidence. And I knew that that's something that I wanted to teach, because I've had to build confidence over the process. And what I've said before in past workshops is my confidence has, up highs and lows. There's sometimes when I feel super confident and sometimes when I don't. And I think that that's just something that we all have to recognize, that even when we're in a really good place, we might not be in a great place the following week or even the following day. And so I share that with you just so you know that even though I see myself as having experience building confidence, returning to the workforce, I'm not an expert, and I'm going to share what I've experienced, and hopefully together as a group that we can talk and use this time to be able to meet each other and make new connections, and also just learn more about building confidence and what that would look like. So the first thing I wanted us to start with is, what are boundaries and why are they so hard to set? And I looked up the definition of boundaries, and it's boundaries are limits we set to protect our emotional energy, time, and values. They're not walls, they're bridges to healthy relationships and self-respect. And when I saw this definition of boundaries, I thought, that's a really great way of saying is that, like, it's a bridge to something better. And oftentimes we think of boundaries as being really restrictive and just, okay, we're putting up a wall, this is our boundary. But actually, if we can look at it as a bridge, as an opportunity for growth and better relationships, that's actually a really great way to look at it. And I'm always trying to find the positive way to reframe things, because oftentimes I can get negative, and I always want to try to see, okay, well, what's a positive way to look at this topic. And so another thing that I was thinking about with boundaries is if we think of them as gates instead of fences, it's actually the path to be able to get us to better things. So, it's not our way of blocking off things or people from our life. It's actually an entryway to something better. It's still very protective, because a gate is still part of that fence. And so it's protective and there's safety there, but it also, allows you to decide who comes in, right? So you are only permitting the things into your safe space that you're willing to let in. Another one that I thought about too is thinking about your boundaries as like a phone battery. If you don't have your boundaries, just like a phone battery can lose its charge, you can lose your emotional energy. You can also feel very depleted if you haven't set those boundaries. And so making sure that you have those boundaries set will actually give you the energy to do other things as a mother or as a friend or as a worker, wherever you may be in this journey. And so I thought it would be important for us to talk about, and here we're going to have a little bit of communication back and forth, and because I'm on mic and you guys aren't, I'll try to repeat what you guys say, or else have you guys speak really loud so that the recording will pick you up. But I thought it would be really important for us to talk about, like, why are boundaries so hard? And I think they're hard for a lot of people, but I think for mothers and women, they're especially hard. And so these are some of the things that came to my mind, and you guys might have some other things, and so be thinking while I'm talking, but these are the ones that for sure are the reasons why I don't always set boundaries. And like I said, I go through periods of time when I'm really good about setting boundaries and not great, just like my confidence. So the first one is we're conditioned to meet everyone else's needs first. So I think of women as being particularly great caregivers, caretakers. And so, and it could be for a man as well that may be the primary caregiver of his family. But if you are in a position of caretaking, you're going to always be putting other people's needs first before your own. That's just very natural. And as women, because of how we're made, that is where we naturally default to is, okay, I've got to put everybody's needs before my own. And it becomes kind of comfortable. The second one is saying no feels like failure. And I oftentimes saying no would just be like, oh, I couldn't do it, right? I just like, because I said no, then I wasn't at my A game, or I wasn't able to fulfill the needs or whatever it may be. That's something that I would definitely feel like, oh, I failed my child because I had to say no. A third one is we don't want to be seen as selfish. I love being a people pleaser. I love helping. I love being that person that's the first to say yes, because it makes me feel good that I'm not being selfish. But it's actually not great to always be the first one to say yes, especially when you really should be saying no. And you know that you should be saying no. And, but again, like this is a trap that I've fallen into because I think, oh, I want to be always giving. I want to be always just like put my needs aside because I'm just such a giving person. I want to be seen as selfless. That's a quality I admire in people. And so I want to also have that same quality in myself. A fourth one is saying no can trigger guilt. So I am classic. I feel mom guilt all the time. And I have a hard time fighting that sometimes. And everything else seems much easier, but that mom guilt just comes in. And so saying no triggers this guilt of like, I just feel really guilty about not being able to do it. And I think that's the hardest thing. And so when I say no, I will oftentimes give a whole huge explanation. So I can't just say no. It's like, I can't do XYZ because I've got this, 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 this. I should just be able to say no. Like, I know, I'm sorry, I can't. But for whatever reason, because again, that guilt is triggered, I feel like I have to say, why, and I would be happy to do it another time, even if I may not be happy to do another time. Like, I have no desire to do it another time. And I think that's something that's tricky because we may be thinking, okay, um, you know, we may be giving the person the idea that we can do it another time when we really mean no, never. So the no is a trigger of guilt for me. Number 5, we want to keep the peace. I am classic go along to get along. My youngest, I have my youngest, and there's a 10-year gap from my oldest to my youngest, and or I should say almost 10-year gap. And it's funny because one of the kids had said when he was, younger, they were saying, Mom, why aren't you as strict with him? Why aren't you as hard on him? You never follow through on your things, or whatever they may say. And it's just because I was so tired of, like, I'm going to go along to get along. I'm just done fighting the fight, and I'm tired of raising all these other kids. So, we want to keep the peace. Like, it's so much easier to say, yes, I'll do whatever you need me to do. So I think there have been many times when I wasn't working, before I became a working mom outside the home, I would run back to the school to get their lunches. I would, stay up really late, even though I was super tired, to help them do something. And I just wanted to keep the peace. I didn't want to hear them tell me, gosh, Mom, so and so always, brings their lunch when they forget it, or so and so, and I just wanted to always have them have happy thoughts about me, because there's going to be plenty of other times when they don't have happy thoughts about me. So if it's easier, I'm just going to do what they want me to do, or say yes to whoever is asking me to do something, because I just want to keep the peace. I don't want to have to tell my boss no, because then they're going to, anyway, there's just going to be issues. So, and then no one has modeled it. How many of us have mothers or people in our life that don't model boundaries very well, and they say yes to everything? So then that's how we, grow up. We think saying yes is the right thing, and we don't learn that boundaries are actually the healthy way of responding to, things in our life that might keep us from doing the things that really matter the most. And so that's something too. I think that's maybe why we may not be so good about setting boundaries. And if we saw more of that modeled, either by our coworkers or by our friends or our family, our parents, whoever it may be, then I think we would be better at doing it ourselves. And unfortunately, if we grew up with parents or a mother that didn't set boundaries, then we're more likely to not set boundaries either, which means then our kids are also likely not to set boundaries. So if we can break that cycle, that would be awesome and great. So I have 6 here, and I'm sure there's probably other reasons. What are some other reasons maybe that you've thought of why you're not very good at setting boundaries? And if I've covered them all, then that's awesome. But yeah, Lorraine. Strong personalities, for sure. Anytime there's someone really strong, like I used to do a lot of PTA through the school, and there was the PTA president, and she happened to be my friend, and she was awesome and great. But she would come to me and say, Heather, you're able to, you have so much talent in this area. Can you just do this? And I'd be like, and I'm thinking, no, I have no time. This is way too much. And I'd say, sure, because A, they were a strong personality, and B, they complimented me, and so I didn't want to say that no, I wasn't good at that, So I, I would, yeah, that's a perfect example. Is people with strong personalities saying no to them or setting boundaries with them, and some of us, those may be our children, right? I, I, I have a child who I absolutely love and adore, but is a very strong personality, and I have a hard time standing up to that personality. Even as I'm an adult, I'm grown up. I can stand up, but I have a really hard time because they have a very strong personality. Yeah. Anything else? High producers. Yeah, that's actually a great example. Oh my gosh, these are such great examples. So if you have somebody coming to you who's a high producer and they're like doing everything, so when they come to you asking you to do something, you think that you also have to do it all because they do it and they always seem to do it so easily and perfectly. And you're like, that's not me. But yes, you feel like more like you can't say no, you can't set those boundaries because they do it all and you're just being asked to do one thing extra. So, yeah. Anything else that comes to mind? I think we've captured most of the issues of why we have a really hard time setting boundaries. And I love the examples that were shared. Um, oftentimes too, we say, okay, well, so here's a question for you. When have you said yes to something that you didn't want to do, um, and it actually um, turned out to be, I mean, so let me take a step back. We might say yes to something that we really don't want to do, but it also might turn out to be okay too, right? So there are times when we might want to set a boundary. We don't for any of these reasons or the ones that were mentioned. And it actually ends up being a good thing that we said yes and we did it. So I'm not saying that setting boundaries is always the right thing, but oftentimes it is the right thing. So I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that. Um, Something else that we might be thinking too is setting boundaries is controlling others. And in other words, when we set boundaries, we're basically telling other people what they can and can't do. And it's actually more about honoring ourselves and self-respecting ourselves. So sometimes we might think that we can't say no because, that's going to, control or hurt others. And it actually is to our advantage. And you can also still set these boundaries and speak in a kind way and still be clear too. And I used to think that, oh, well, if I said no, I was actually being unkind. And the reality is when you set these boundaries, you're actually that's the kind thing to do. Because oftentimes if you don't set those boundaries, that's when resentment can set in. And that's something that we don't want. Um, I also thought about like, what are some of the things that we might say? And, when we're having these boundary issues. And I remember some of the things that I would say, and I wrote these down so I wouldn't forget. But so when we've been asked to do something and we don't set a boundary, we might say something like this: "It's fine, I'll just do it. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. They need me more than I need rest." I've said that to my kids, right? If I say no, I'll hurt their feelings. So those are like actual examples of things that I know I have said in the past. And you may have said some of those things as well. And, that we just have to get out of our heads of those things that we think that we're saying is a good thing and it's actually not a good thing. I love this quote because it seems to say exactly what we should be telling ourselves anytime we don't want to set these clear boundaries. So you teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. And when I think about this, it really captures exactly why we want to set boundaries. Because when we are allowing things or allowing people to, break our boundaries, or in like if they are actually coming in on our personal time or those kind of things, then we're actually giving them permission to continue to either treat us that way, or it basically tells them that we're okay with how they're treating us or what they're doing. So every time I would tell my child, sure, I'll come bring your homework or whatever, I'm letting them treat me that way. I'm basically giving them permission to have me be there, you know, their shorter cook, their slave, their whatever you want to call it. Basically, I'm at their beck and call. And when I had to return to the workforce, it actually was a beautiful thing because my kids could no longer expect that I would come back to the school to bring them things. And we talked about this in one workshop about my daughter leaving her shoes at home. But I will say that my kids stopped forgetting things. They would always remember their homework, always remember their lunches, because I stopped allowing them to expect me to bring everything to school. And at first, I felt, it's interesting, that mom guilt, like I felt really guilty that I wasn't able to bring them their homework, or whatever it was, and that they were going to get a bad grade because they would get a zero because they didn't turn it in. And I used to feel that guilt of like, oh, it's my fault because I'm working and I can't get it to them. But actually, that taught them such a good lesson, because then they started being independent and self-sufficient and doing the things for themselves that, quite frankly, I should have been training them to be that way all along. But being out of the work and being now in the workforce forced me to have to, tell them no. And I'm glad, because now they're so much better. They remember things. They're responsible. But for whatever reason, I just felt that guilt. So I was giving them permission to treat me that way. And we have to be really, careful. And of course, there's lots of other, worse situations like abuse and those kind of things. But anytime we allow a boss, a spouse or a partner or children or a neighbor or whoever it may be in your life to in what is impede on your boundaries or whatever, then you're basically saying it's okay. It's okay, and that is going to teach them how to treat you. And you want to make sure that you're not giving into those things simply because you're training them. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how do we normalize boundaries. So I think we all know someone who's really good about saying no, and they don't have the long, address afterwards, which I always do. And I admire those people so much because they can articulate exactly what they will and won't do in such a beautiful way. Or they may say something afterwards, but it's a very, precise way of saying it. And we're going to talk about that as well. But I think it's important to, build the courage first to start talking about these boundaries of what you want to do. So something that, when I was thinking about what did I want to talk about, is like, okay, you need to first set up your values. Like, what are your values? What do you value in your life to set up those boundaries with? If you don't know your values, you don't know what boundaries you're going to set. So for example, I work completely remotely. So if I allow my manager or coworkers to, call me or ask me for things outside of my normal, work hours, if it's not an emergency and they're just asking me, hey, by the way, can you hand me this? Or excuse me, can you email me this? Can you do that for me? Then I don't value my time. I don't value my family time. And so you have to think, okay, what is it that's really, really important to you? And I also think like your personal time. Oftentimes when I was a younger mother, I wasn't very good about giving myself, time and space, and my kids could come and interrupt me if I was reading a book, and I would put my book down and I would help them or whatever. Like if I value my personal time, I would have set a boundary and I would have said, this is mom time from this time to this or whatever. And I know that that's really hard, especially when you have kids that are constantly asking you over and over and again, or if you have a boss that is constantly asking you for this and this, and it gives you that pressure, especially if you are in a situation where others are, are doing those things. I think that's really hard. Like I said, with my boundaries with work, it was really hard because other people, I had a person that worked for me, and she was on vacation and was being asked to do some things that, she was on vacation, and I said, don't respond, because if you respond, then that person's always going to know that even when you're on vacation, you're on, and you're not. You're supposed to be on vacation. And she responded, and I was like, oh, and then what was interesting is then it made me feel like, well, then I'm going to have to respond because, so and so responded. Then anyway, it was just this vicious cycle. So we need to make sure we name our values. And, so ask yourself, what value are you protecting? Okay. Is it your time? Is it your rest? Is it honesty? Is it connection? Like, what do you actually value? Another, so Another thing that I love too, as we're talking about confidence and trying to get the courage to set these boundaries, is this statement here: no is a complete sentence. I don't think I've ever been able to say no without saying something afterwards. Um, I was trying to think, if somebody asked me to do something, I would say no and then why I couldn't. But wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if we could all have the courage to just say no, not have to say, not apologize afterwards or give the reason why, just say no. I encourage you all to try that. I'm going to try that as well, because it's not something that comes natural to me to just say no without giving a huge explanation afterwards. So, along with saying no, let's talk about some ways that we can set these boundaries in a very easy way. Now, as you guys know, I like to take small steps. I don't like it to be overwhelming. I believe in doing the small steps first, because they build on each other and then they also breed confidence. So when you do small things over and over and over again, like those small things then become bigger and you realize, okay, I can do this. So start small and safe. So an example for this would be, start with the easy things that aren't so difficult to say no to. And so some of them may be, let me get my notes here. You might just say, that doesn't work for me. Like maybe somebody asks you if you can bring an extra, plate of cookies to a function. Just say, I'm sorry, that's not going to work with my schedule right now. Just like something very easy. Saying no to somebody that needs you to bring cookies, that might be easy for you, it might be hard for somebody else. So think about what are the very small things to say no to. Another thing could be, let's say you have been a short order cook for your family. Let's say you make 3 different breakfasts, or you're always, making multiple different things for your kids. Maybe that's somewhere where you can start easy and say no, we're going to have just this. And that might be your easy thing, that might be your small thing, but it might be somebody else's big thing. So you have to kind of figure out what's something small that you could start with by setting boundaries, and use those first, because then again, it just makes it easier when the harder ones come. Then use simple, clear language. So simple, clear language to me is, like I said, that's not going to work for me right now. Some other examples that I also wrote down were, I need some space to recharge. So let's say somebody's needing, like somebody in your family is needing to do something. You can say, I know I need some time to recharge. I need this space to recharge. So something very simple, very easy. Or another way to be able to say it very clearly is, I won't be able to help you with that today. So if somebody's expecting you to do something, maybe it's something in the neighborhood, maybe it's something at church, maybe it is something at work, but just saying I'm not going to be able to help you with that today. But something again that I think sometimes I fall in the trap with is making it this big long sentence. No, I won't be able to help you with that today because I've got and so that I can justify why I'm saying no and why I'm setting that boundary. But just say it very simply. I'm not going to be able to help you with that today. Um, repeat, repeat, repeat. So as we continue to say no and we set our boundaries, it will get easier. Like at first, it's really hard because it's not comfortable, especially I think if you've always been very willing to give and you like feeling like you're selfless, because that's me, it's hard. So the more you practice it, the more you do it over and over again, then you start to feel really comfortable and you realize, okay, the world didn't end by saying no, like it worked. And then those individuals that you're saying no to will start to respect those boundaries. And it's, at first it just seems really, really hard because you're just doing something that isn't natural, but it'll get easier over time. Talk about it openly. Something else that I think is really helpful with setting boundaries is letting people that you're around know that you've set this boundary. So something that I did with a church responsibility, I had to set a boundary because we were having meetings that were lasting way too long. And so I just let them know, I'm working on setting boundaries for myself and following the things that I need to do. And so I have committed that I'm going to do this. And so as part of that, I'm setting a boundary that we're only meeting for an hour, or at least I can only stay for an hour and do that. And if you let people that are around you know that you're setting these boundaries, it's sort of like setting goals, and it's good to let other people know that you're doing that because they'll also encourage you. So for example, and I did this with work too. I had told a coworker that I was going to leave the office every day by 5:30 or whatever it happened to be. And then if I was continuing to stay later and they'd be like, Heather, didn't you say that you were going to leave at 5:30? I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So your people around you will help you continue to set those boundaries. So I think it's really important to share. And especially like with your family too. You just say, hey, I need to set these boundaries because I'm a happier and healthier person by setting these boundaries. And we'll have a better relationship because of that. And then when they recognize you not keeping those boundaries firm, they'll help you. People who love you will help you do that. Maybe not your kid that wants you to break the boundaries, but I think those that love you are going to want to help you. Using visual reminders. I'm a big person about having notes on my fridge or little notes on my wall or on my bulletin board and things like that to remind me of what I've decided to do. So sometimes I will print something up on the computer and I'll just stick it on my fridge as a reminder of the boundaries that I'm setting. It could be whether I'm, and again, these are just some of my boundaries, but the boundaries that I've set, maybe, I'm not going to eat after a certain period of time. And so I might put a little reminder of like, after 8 p.m., the fridge is closed or whatever it might be. And it also might be that you, just have like a reminder on your mirror every time when you wake up, and the boundary just again, to remind yourself. And after a while, you won't have to have these reminders, but I think having those visual cues can be really, really helpful. And I've seen some of those, those really great quotes that you can print off too, that might say things like, it's okay to say no without guilt, or my needs matter too. I've seen others that say, like, I can be kind and firm at the same time. So these kind of visual cues that can remind you, okay, stay strong, set those boundaries, and you'll be better off because of it. But again, all of these actions, it takes practice, right? And as we do them, it'll start to feel more comfortable. And then so if we start with these small things, when the harder things come for setting a boundary, then we'll be much more comfortable and it'll be a much easier experience. Okay, so let's talk about how our boundaries can help build our confidence, because these confidence workshops, even though they don't build on each other, there's a lot of talk that we mention in these workshops that are very similar. And setting boundaries is super important for building our confidence, because when we are willing to set boundaries, we tell ourselves that we respect ourselves. And when we don't set boundaries, we're telling ourselves we don't have any worth. So that self-worth is right there where your confidence is going to grow. So when you believe in yourself and you believe that you are valuable and you set those boundaries because you know that this is true, your confidence grows as a result. And I think it's very easy for us to think, okay, I can't set these boundaries. And when we don't set those boundaries, then we start to feel like, okay, well, we lose again. That feeds into our lack of self-confidence because we're just not having the courage to speak up for ourselves and say what really, really matters. And something that I struggle with and think about oftentimes is how am I going to be able to set these boundaries to, what can I do to make sure that I'm setting the boundaries that will help me and also help those that are around us. And so um, talking about our boundaries in the sense of like affirming our worth, which I just mentioned. They can also create peace. So confidence can't thrive in chaos. So when everything's crazy in your life, you can't be confident. I know that this is the case because when my life has been really chaotic, whether it's something from work or family or church or just neighborhood, whatever it may be, I don't have confidence in making the right decisions. And I lose the ability to think about what I really want and what matters because it's so chaotic. So thinking about like those boundaries, building confidence, because you're going to have the peace to be more confident. Another one is they build trust in ourselves. So sometimes when I've lost confidence, it's been because I didn't trust myself. And if you're always saying yes to people and you're not setting those boundaries, you're going to lose trust in yourself because you're going to say, well, my judgment's really off right now. And if I'm not having good judgment with my boundaries, then if I think that I can do something, I really can't because I have bad judgment. And you're going to start doubting yourself. So I think it's really important to start to realize how they correlate and recognize that as you set boundaries, you're actually going to feel more confident in what you end up doing outside of, those specific boundaries too. So you're going to trust yourself, you're going to trust your judgment so much more because you have felt like you've been able to say no and you've been able to see, oh, everything worked out okay, like it was perfectly fine. Confidence can't grow in resentment. So I think one of the areas where I really struggle is when I say yes, and I know I shouldn't be saying yes, I feel super resentful to the person that asked me to do something. And it's not that person's fault. That person asked me to do something and they probably thought that it was either really great for me to do, good for my family, good for me. And I didn't say no. And then I'm thinking, and they don't know that I'm resenting them. They don't know that I'm frustrated that they asked me to do something when I keep saying yes and I'm just tired of it. And we all know the people that we can always ask them to do something. They always will do it. You can count on them. And sometimes we like to be that person that everybody can count on. But the disadvantage of that is that when we have somebody who's always, reaching out to us, then we can start to feel like we're being, used and abused. And we are going to build poor relationships with those around us if we have that resentment. And I know that I've held that resentment and it's not healthy and it's not good. And then we start to not have, confidence in that relationship also. So confidence is in all areas of our life, not just in the areas where we might be building confidence to return to the workforce or start a new job, start a company, wherever that confidence may be. When you have those resentful feelings in your heart and your mind, then confidence really has a hard time growing. I love this quote, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, by Eleanor Roosevelt. And when we don't set these boundaries, when we're not setting those boundaries, we're feeling inferior. We're feeling like we're not a good mom or a good wife or a good caretaker, husband, whatever it may be. When you don't set those boundaries, we actually feel really bad. So realizing that when we set those boundaries, it's actually going to make us feel better. And we have to, those boundaries that we set day in, day out will actually help us feel better about our relationships and better about the people that we work with and that we're serving. I also love this quote, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And I set myself on fire all the time, like all the time, because part of it, I got used to it. I got used to being set on fire all the time because I wanted to have everybody else have better situations, better lives, better and I wanted them to be happy. So I was perfectly fine about setting myself on fire. And it started to feel comfortable. Like that felt normal to always be setting myself on fire, which is so not healthy. It's so not not the right thing. But at the time, it felt like, oh, that's just normal. And we can help other people without always being the one in the chaotic space and always feeling like the craziness that goes on. Something else I want to talk about is how we can actually end up helping those around us with these statements that we're going to be saying. So I thought of some different things that we could say if we're in those situations when we're asked to do something. So I talked about them a little bit, but I had thought of some other ones that I thought would be really helpful to share. Using a pause. So pausing before we actually respond. So oftentimes somebody will ask us to do something and we respond right away. And we should pause, think about it, and then respond. And oftentimes if we let ourselves have that little pause, it's just enough time to help us think, okay, remember, Heather, you set this boundary, you really don't want to do that, so do not do it. And sometimes I've been good at it, sometimes I haven't, but using the pause. Another strategy is to use I statements. So it's so much better to be able to say the I statement. So for example, you're speaking from your own experience. So I feel overwhelmed when I'm always the one coordinating everything. I'd like to share that responsibility moving forward. So you put it on you, but you also encourage the person that's asking you to do something to take part in that. So you're sharing the responsibility by inviting them to be part of the solution, right? So with your children, this is a great way to be able to use that, is saying, I have so much on my plate right now. I think if you helped me, whether it's clean, or if you could also help run these errands, I think that would really help both of us. And at first it feels a little uncomfortable because we haven't been saying it, but as we continue to use those I statements, I think we'll feel better. Yeah.
Someone gave me great advice years ago that you can also say, let me check on my calendar, let me check on things, and I'll get back to you.
So check the calendar and then get back to you. Okay.
That's the pause, and you may come back and say yes, then you also can come back and say, address it right now.
I love that. And actually, that makes me think of a time when, so the example that was given for those that may not have heard that is that, say that let me check with my calendar. So when somebody asks you to do something and you want to have a boundary, but you're just like in the moment saying, let me check my calendar and see if that will work. And the thing that's great about that is that so I've done this where somebody has asked me and then I respond to them in a text, and it was so much easier for me to respond in a text than it was a verbal, no, I can't do whatever it might have been. And so just being able to say, let me check my calendar and see if that will work. And I'm thinking in my mind, I know that's not going to work. I've done way too much stuff. I've got so much on my plate. I can't do it. And then you just respond back in a text, oh gosh, I'd love to, but I can't this week. It's bad for me. The only thing that is tricky with that too is you need to, if you don't want to be asked to do it again, like if it's something that you are setting a boundary and you're like, I never want to be asked to co-chair the book fair, whatever it might be, you need to say from the get-go, I have just a lot going on, and it's not going to work for me this year, and they probably won't ask you again to help with it that year, but they could. So just make sure that whatever boundary you're setting, if you really mean that you're never going to do it again, you need to be very, because they'll keep asking you. They'll, especially if in the past you've always been the go-to, you've always been the person that they could always count on, and all of a sudden you're now setting boundaries, they're going to think, oh, well, this was just a bad week or bad month or whatever. So make sure that when you do get back to them, you're like definitive that this is not going to work. But there are times when we say no because it is a bad week, and maybe you do want to do it another week. And so, coming back to them saying, it's not going to work for me this week, but check back with me, next month. And recently I was asked to participate as a judge for a project at BYU. And I originally said yes. Well, actually, I had reached out to the student and just said, hey, if you need help with this, let me know. I'd be happy to help. And then things got really busy. So then when they asked me if I could be this judge, I wanted to say yes. so badly that and I was embarrassed because I had said to them, let me know when you need help. I'd be happy to help you. And then all of a sudden, my life got really busy, and I had no business saying yes to help. So I had to think about that, and I just responded and just said, I thought I could do it, and I've just been much busier than I had thought. But I hope to be able to do it in the future, meaning, not this semester, but maybe another semester. But that happens all the time when we might have seemed available and we might have really thought we could do something. And then life gets busy and things change. And I think it's perfectly fine for us to then go back to that person and say, I thought it would work, but it's just not going to work for me right now. Um, Another one is, and I love this word, setting loving limits and thinking of it as loving, like limits are loving. So, for example, I'd love to help, but I need to say no this time so I can be present with my family. And usually, if you use family as a reason, most people think that that's a great reason to not do something. I want to spend more time with my family. For example, I had an opportunity to be a part of a speaking opportunity when my daughter is in town, and I really want to do the speaking opportunity. And if it had been any other time, I would have done it in a heartbeat, but I want to spend time with my daughter. And so it felt very easy for me to say, I'd love to, but my daughter's in town and I want to spend time with my family. And but if I hadn't had her as the reason why, I would have done it for sure. But if my life had been really crazy and I didn't have my daughter as the excuse, then I need to decide right then, like, what do I value? Is my time valuable? Or maybe doing this speaking engagement is something I value. And it could possibly be that too. So again, going back to your values and what's really important. Um, and also, too, another one is to practice this saying no and setting those boundaries in low stake moments, meaning moments, it again kind of speaks to the starting small, but moments that aren't going to be a big deal. So, for example, I need to end this conversation at 8 o'clock so I can get my rest tonight, right? So, something that's very easy if you're talking on the phone with someone, you're like, oh, I promised myself I was going to get to bed earlier. You can just say, I promised myself that this is what I'm going to do. And so those are low stake moments. Those aren't a really big deal. So practice with those small things and then build up to the bigger ones, unless you're ready to just go right for it. And then have some reflection time with your journal, like thinking, what's a situation where I've been silencing my own needs for the sake of keeping peace. So thinking about, okay, what have you been doing all along because you didn't want to upset or rock the boat and get everybody else. Like again, sometimes we think it's just easier just to say yes to keep everybody happy. Um, Another thing too, and we talked about affirmations, but we can also do mini affirmations in our mind that can help us to have this sense of the boundaries. And the mini affirmation that I came up with is, I don't have to explain or justify my no, it is enough. So being able to say no, and sometimes you might have to say these little mini affirmations often to be able to have it sink in. So I don't have to explain or justify my no, it is enough. And it should be enough, but oftentimes we just think we have to do it all. We have to be everybody's help whenever they need it. All right. I always talk about the key takeaways. Like what is it that we want to take away from this? And these are the things that came to my mind, but you might have had some other ones. Boundaries are acts of self-respect, not selfishness. So we are respecting ourselves by setting those boundaries. And I think if we look at it that way, then it gets that mom guilt out. And that's something that is a much healthier way to look at it. You can be kind and clear at the same time. And that again is not having this big rambly explanation of why you're setting the boundary, but just being very kind and very clear at the same time. Discomfort is part of growth. So sometimes you're going to feel really uncomfortable having to say no. But again, as we start doing this over and over again, our confidence is going to grow. We're going to start remembering, oh, that felt really good, excuse me, to say no, because I was able to keep my boundary in place and now I don't resent that person. And you feel so much better. But at first, it's going to be really uncomfortable. But you're going to grow through this because those uncomfortable situations are actually going to tell you more about yourself and how you're building that confidence. And then boundaries create space for what matters most. We know what really matters to us, but oftentimes in the moment, in order to keep the peace, make things easy. We say yes to things that we really don't want to say yes to. And when we have those boundaries, we actually have space for our families or for ourselves or our hobbies, whatever it might be that we feel really, that we value, right? So it goes back to what we value. And if we value those things, then we're going to have a lot more space for the things that, that we have been valuing all along, but we didn't put them as a priority because we didn't make those boundaries. We didn't put those boundaries in place. And we'll talk about questions after this, but always, remembering you're stronger than you think. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I love to help mothers return to the workforce and build confidence. And that's kind of why I started Elavare. And my QR code is a way for you to reach the website. If you or someone you know is trying to build confidence or wants to return to the workforce, that's really what I love to do. And like these confidence workshops are just another way for me to be able to help those that are trying to think about, okay, do I want to go back into the workforce? What do I want to do with myself? And those are the conversations I love to have, but we have to build the confidence first. Like I said earlier, if you have to get a job and you have no other choice, like you don't have the time to be able to build up the confidence. You just have to go in the deep end and swim. But if you have the time, it's great to start building confidence little by little, and setting those boundaries are really going to help you get into a really good place to be able to do the things that are going to require even more confidence. And so I leave that with you, and I'm super glad that you guys came today.